or the Iranian government, in particular the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, this guy is going to soon be the longest-serving autocrat in the Middle East. He's been ruling since 1989. The only person who's been ruling longer is Sultan Qaboos of Oman, who's apparently on his deathbed. And they say about revolutionaries that you're revolutionary until you get power and then you become a conservative. And I would say for the Supreme Leader, not doing a nuclear deal is a big economic risk because Iran is facing major economic challenges. But I would argue it's potentially a larger political risk to do a nuclear deal if you're the Supreme Leader, because this is someone who for 25 years he's prioritized hostility with the United States, intransigence vis-a-vis the outside world. And to make a major concession like this nuclear deal, and it would require a long-term concession, 10 years, that could be politically risky for him at home. We say in the United States the first rule of politics is know your base, and the Supreme Leader's base in Tehran are those who've been very intransigent towards the United States.
David, it's fascinating because one can argue that it is in both countries' interest to have a deal. That's an argument that's pretty easy to make. But both countries face almost identical, or at least quite similar, elements of whatever we want to call them, hardline factions that complicate this tremendously.
Both countries have hardliners at home who say, how can you compromise with this regime that represents everything that's bad about the world? Iranians say that much as we do. I was struck when I went to Tehran last December to interview the Iranian Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, who's their principal negotiator, who's meeting as we speak with Secretary Kerry. I was struck by several things. First, the yearning of most Iranians to be part of the modern world. I mean, this is a sophisticated, technologically advanced country, and the reason that President Rouhani was elected by a wide margin when he was not expected to get that many votes is he said, we don't want to be a country that only has friendships with Russia and China. We want to be part of the world. And that really resonated with Iranians. On the other side, you have this Revolutionary Guard. Henry Kissinger's famous for saying that you can deal with Iran if it's a nation, but not if it's a cause. In other words, once it stops seeing its identity as a revolutionary nation, it will become possible to negotiate deals like this and others. And I think that's one question.
Sure they're there. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure when I was there in December. I had one senior person very close to the Supreme Leader say to me, any deal is unacceptable because any deal will mean our revolution is over. And I think that's the benefit for the West. If they make a deal, even if it's sort of an ugly deal, it will mean they've begun to turn.
You wrote a fascinating column a few weeks ago, which you quoted Karim, talking about a potentially key figure here, the head of, I think, the Iranian Security Council, Ali Shamkhani. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Do you have any sense of the role he's played in recent weeks?
I was struck on a recent trip of the Middle East that his name came up in every capital among officials who were well connected with their intelligence as someone who was a new figure on the scene in Iran. In a sense, he bridges the world of the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guard on the one hand, and President Rouhani and the state on the other. He runs the National Security Council that's supposed to organize between the two. And interestingly, he was the person who managed to get the deal in Iraq to get Iran's supported Nouri al-Maliki, this polarizing Shiite prime minister who served so disastrously over the last few years, was removed, and Shamkhani was the guy who went and brokered the deal. So his standing back in Tehran improved. He's seen as a rival or maybe a moderating face of the head of the Quds force, Qasem Soleimani, who's the figure of revolution, the man who's out there they're fighting the battles in Lebanon, in Bahrain, in Yemen, all these places where Iran is fomenting trouble.
And I think it touches upon a larger point, which is the rise of the Revolutionary Guards within Iran. For a long time we got used to calling the Iranian government the clerical regime, the Islamic Republic. But in reality, the institution of the Revolutionary Guards have really eclipsed the institution of the clergy in terms of wielding domestic power, but also controlling Iran's foreign policy. And David touched upon Iranian society and its aspirations to be part of the outside world. And this is really the paradox of Iran, that you have a society which aspires to be like South Korea, prosperous and globally integrated, ruled by a government whose instincts more closely resemble North Korea, the isolationism, ideological purity. And I think the real challenge we have bringing it back to the United States is that the policies that we use to counter Iran's nuclear aspirations, political and economic isolation, in many ways entrench these very hardline forces in Iran that we're trying to get rid of. And somehow I think we have to start to think more creatively about how we get on the right side of the Iranian people's aspirations as well, not just against the nuclear aspirations of the Iranian government.
Yet those sanctions have certainly been effective, or they really bite. I mean, that's the incentive for the other side.
They bite. The Iranians are good at suffering. They suffered through a long war with Iraq, and I think Americans should be careful about assuming that additional sanctions, these sanctions brought them to the table. Additional sanctions will bring them to their knees, to capitulation. I wouldn't think that would happen.
That would be a mistake. You both agree?
Well, I think that absolutely. And the other danger here is that the person who really deserves most credit for Iran's international isolation was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the previous president, who kind of gratuitously united the outside world against Iran. This time around with Rouhani and Zarif, it's much more difficult to isolate Iran. So if we pass kind of premature unilateral sanctions, that really jeopardizes the international coalition against Iran. Countries like Russia and China may bail.
Well, let's talk about the P5. Are there any differences in recent weeks or months with China, Russia, Germany, Great Britain, and France?
Modest. In my conversations with Russian diplomats, they've stressed, we are very much part of this coalition. It's thought that they, want a deal that offers more concessions than the U.S. is now willing to offer. The hardest line member of the coalition appears to be France. I think that, in a sense, that it's the Arab neighbors and their views and the way in which they will react to whatever is negotiated that's most concerning, and plus Israel. I mean, Saudi Arabia has to decide, if a deal is made, are we going to insist on a nuclear program as aggressive as that of Iran? Because that's a big proliferation breakout. Then you're heading toward a region where everybody's basically got a bomb-making program. They've said they're going to do that. Did they mean it? Because that's a more dangerous world. What's Israel going to do? Bibi Netanyahu's said himself absolutely against this deal. He's said over and over again, he thinks it's dangerous, America's wrong to be doing it. What's he going to do about it? There's always the risk that Israel might decide, that this deal that's been negotiated leaves Israel more insecure and take some kind of military or unconventional action. So after Monday and the outcome Monday, or its prolongation, there's so many branches in the road that people will need to think about, because they lead us into areas where there could be military conflict.
We both have mentioned what happens if there's not a deal and the role of the Israelis. If this ever collapses, either short term or they try to go to March and then they don't get any kind of a long-term deal, what is the likelihood of a military action, either by the Israelis or by the Americans?
Well, it's been believed that the Israelis have concluded that they don't have the weapons to strike Iran hard enough in these hardened mountain facilities where they keep some of their centrifuges to make an attack worthwhile. The U.S. could, the Israelis can't. I think the danger is a little bit different. We have a region in absolute chaos. It's turned upside down. It's just disintegrating, some people in the region say. And a real dilemma for the United States going forward is, should we try to work with this Iranian regime to try to rebalance the region? Should we try to draw Iran and Saudi Arabia together for talks about regional stability? Should we, try to bring Shia-Sunni balance? And this is threatening to become an absolutely destructive, 30 years war, and we may be in one of the last periods when you could stop it. I think that for President Obama, Secretary Kerry, is a crucial issue. They've decided to put the nuclear issue first, but this one is in some ways even bigger right behind it.
Karim. I also think the likelihood of military action is extremely low. President Obama, if you're looking to calm the Middle East, the last thing you want to do is open up another military conflict with Iran. The challenge here is whether you can rely on Iran to fight a group like ISIS, which is fueled by Sunni disenfranchisement. If you fight Sunni disenfranchisement with Shia radicals, you're likely pouring more gasoline on the fire. But I think the likelihood of military action is low, also because Iran is clever enough not to drive their nuclear car 90 miles an hour. Even if they recommence their program, they do it in a pretty deliberate way, not to trigger military action on our end.
It'll be a fascinating week and probably a couple months. Karim and David, thank you very much.